The storm had rolled down from the high peaks without warning, a wall of white that swallowed the valley whole. The Montana winter of 1892 was no ordinary season. It was a season that tested men and broke women. By the second day, whole cabins were lost beneath the drifts, and trails once known like the back of one's hand disappeared as though the mountains themselves had swallowed them. It was in that silence, after the wind had screamed itself hoarse and left behind only the groan of bending pines, that he found it. A patch of red cloth, half buried in the snow, whipping faintly in the wind like a warning. The mountain man stopped dead. His breath smoked in the frozen air, heart thundering with a sudden, terrible suspicion. He dropped his pack, fell to his knees, and began clawing at the drift with both hands. Snow burned his skin, numbed his fingers to bone, but he didn't stop. Each handful he tore away only revealed more weight above, more suffocating cold pressing down. Somewhere beneath he swore he heard a sound, a muffled gasp, a thready breath, or perhaps only the cruel trick of the storm. But he didn't dare take the chance. Someone was down there, someone left to die. So he dug until his nails split, until his palms bled, until the snow clung to his arms up to the elbow. The cold tried to slow him, but something hotter than fire drove him on. Because no one deserved to be buried alive in the white silence of the mountains. His breath came ragged, mist curling into the air as his hands tore deeper into the snowbank. The red cloth gave way to something solid, cloth stiffened with frost, tangled hair frozen into a snarl. For a moment his chest clenched so tight he thought his heart had stopped. Then, there, a cheek, pale, waxen, rimed with ice crystals, eyes closed, lashes crusted white. He pressed his ear down, desperate, and at first there was nothing, just the hiss of wind sliding through the trees. And then, a sound. Faint. So faint he almost thought it was his imagination. A shallow gasp, rattling like it had to claw its way past frozen lungs. "She's alive," he muttered, voice shaking in the empty woods. His hands moved faster, fueled by a surge of savage determination. He dug her free from the waist up, cradled her head against his chest to keep it from lolling backward. Her skin was colder than stone, her lips were split and blue. Whoever had left her here, bound beneath the snow, abandoned like some unwanted animal, had meant for the mountain to finish what their cruelty had begun. But she wasn't gone yet, and as long as her breath still stirred the air, he wasn't about to let the cold claim her. He pulled his knife, cut loose the rope stiffened into her dress, and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, more bone and ice than flesh. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he staggered toward the shelter of the pines. Behind him, the drift closed again, covering all trace of where she had lain. Ahead, the wilderness stretched endless and merciless. But he had her now, and as long as his legs carried him, she would not go back under. He stumbled through the trees, every step a battle against the knee-deep drifts. The storm had no pity. It lashed him with needles of snow, scoured his eyes raw, and howled as though it wanted her back. The girl in his arms gave no sound. Her head sagged against his chest, her breath shallow as a dying ember. He could feel the cold leaching into him through her body, but he clutched her tighter, as if his grip alone could keep her tethered to this world. At last he found it, an outcrop of rock he'd used before, its face half sheltered from the wind, a pocket in the wilderness that could hold heat if a man was desperate enough, and he was. He lowered her onto the ground with care, stripping off his heavy coat and laying it beneath her. His fingers trembled as he struck flint to steel, sparks spitting uselessly into the dark. He cursed, struck again. Once, twice. The third caught on a twist of dry grass he'd stashed weeks before. He blew, coaxing it, his breath nearly frantic. Flame licked up, faint and frail, but flame all the same. He fed it with bark, then pine twigs, then heavier branches until it snapped and roared. The shadows fled back, and in their glow he turned to her. Her lips were cracked, her skin a shade no living flesh ought to be. He pressed his hand to her chest, still a beat, slow and fluttering, like a bird's wings tangled in frost. "You're not dying here," he whispered, voice harsh in the firelight. "Not while I've got breath in me." He dragged his own blanket from his pack, wrapped it around her, then pulled her against him close to the fire. His heat, the fire's heat. Anything to keep her tethered. The storm raged outside the circle of flame, but in that narrow hollow, something else stirred, a defiance as fierce as the mountain itself. He wasn't just fighting the cold anymore, he was fighting for her life. The fire burned steady now, its light carving gold across the snow-packed walls of the shelter. Still, the girl lay slack against him, her breath's shallow whispers that threatened to fade with each passing moment. He leaned closer, speaking low, as though words alone might anchor her. "Stay with me, girl. You hear me? Just stay." Her lashes flickered, not quite opening, a tremor shuddering through her body. Relief jolted through him. She was still there, somewhere behind that pale face. He pulled his canteen from his belt, shaking it. The water inside was half ice, but it would have to do. He tipped it gently against her lips. At first it spilled uselessly down her chin, soaking into the blanket. He tried again, holding her head steady. This time she swallowed, a faint, stubborn motion that near broke him with hope. "That's it," he murmured, brushing snow-matted hair from her forehead. "Talk a little more. You got fight in you yet." Her voice came then, ragged and barely sound, but it cut through the storm like a bell. "It hurts." The words struck him harder than any blizzard could. His throat worked, but he forced calm into his reply. "I know it does, but pain means you're alive, and alive means we keep going." He drew her closer, wrapping her tighter in the blanket, pressing his own body heat into her fragile frame. His coat and furs were gone to her already. He felt the mountain's bite deep in his own bones, but he didn't care. The fire popped, sending sparks upward into the night. For the first time since he dug her out, he dared to believe she might live, but the storm outside hadn't eased and dawn was still hours away. He held her closer, his arms iron around her. Whatever devils had left her in that frozen drift, they hadn't counted on him finding her. And so he made his vow in silence. They would not take her life tonight. When at last the storm loosened its grip, the sky above the high ridges bled grey instead of black, a pale light pressing through the cracks of the storm shelter he had carved. The snow had drifted higher through the night, sealing them in like a tomb, but the fire still burned, a stubborn heart beating against the cold. He opened his eyes to find her still nestled against him, breath rising in faint clouds. She lived, weak, broken near to the edge, but alive. A relief deeper than words swept through him, though it was shadowed by the weight of choice. They couldn't stay here another night. The wood was nearly gone. His strength bled thin from digging and tending and holding her through the storm. She needed warmth, real warmth, food and shelter, things the mountain wasn't about to give them if they lingered. Slowly he unwrapped her from his furs just enough to see her face. The color had returned, faint though it were, as her lips parted, a whisper trembling out. "You found me." He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat near choking him. "I did, and I ain't letting you go again." Her eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion pulling her under. But the words mattered. She was still tethered to this world, still hearing him. With care, he packed the fire down, stamping it so no wandering hunter would know they'd been there. Then he braced himself, lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than she ought to be, hollowed by hunger, by cold, by whatever cruelty had left her in that snow. The trail down the mountain would be no easy thing. The drifts were deep, the trees bowed with ice, but he squared his shoulders, set her weight against his chest, and stepped out into the grey of morning. Each crunch of his boots was a vow. Step by step, breath by breath, he would carry her back to life. And behind him, the storm howled in defeat. The mountain did not let him go easy. Snow lay in heavy folds, waist-deep in places, swallowing his boots until every step was a battle. His arms ached from the weight he carried, though he dared not loosen his grip. She lay against him, wrapped in furs, her face turned toward his chest, her breath faint but steady. The trees leaned overhead like watchers, their branches hung low with ice. When the wind swept through, it shook loose cascades of powder that stung his face and found its way down his collar. He pressed on, teeth clenched, every breath leaving steam that vanished into the grey air. Once his knees buckled, driving him into the drift. Snow filled his gloves as he caught himself. For a moment, the world spun white, the ache in his muscles screaming louder than sense. He might have lain there, let the mountain have him. But then he felt the faint stir of her breath against his chest, a thread of life depending on him. With a growl, he heaved himself upright. He could feel skin splitting at his knuckles, the sting of cold carving into the cuts he'd earned, digging her free. His hands bled inside his gloves, and still he held her tighter. Hours dragged like years. His boots found the half-buried line of a game trail, and he followed it down the slope, slipping, stumbling, never stopping. The sky above began to pale, a thin light crawling from east to west. At last, through the trees, he caught sight of something that didn't belong to the wild, a crooked fence post, jutting from the snow like a broken bone. His heart kicked hard in his chest. Beyond it lay the faint outline of a cabin roof, smoke trickling weak from its chimney. He staggered toward it, voice raw when he shouted, "Help! For God's sake, help!" The door of the cabin flew open, and a man's shadow filled the frame. The mountain had not beaten him. Not yet.